Hello, everybody. How's it going? Happy World Ocean Day. I guess wouldn't you say, Chris? Kind of every day is World Ocean Day here at OCEARCH, but today's kind of an extra special day to celebrate the ocean, and we are so glad to see all of you here today. Also joining us, we have Captain Brett Mcbride, and we are kind of excited to really take a deep dive into our history, really show you how OCEARCH got started. And I think you'll be surprised at how many twists and turns this story takes. Really, the big lesson here, I think, that we can all learn from, and Chris being the master of adjusting to things and rolling with the punches and really finding a way to make this succeed. So I'm really excited to see both you and Brett here. How are you guys, Chris? Brett?
Good.
I'm doing well, thank you.
I'm looking forward to this too. I don't think Brett and I have ever really told this story from the beginning together, so I'm sure there'll be a lot of blasts from the past and good memories.
Absolutely. And so the other thing, everybody watching, this is your chance to ask Chris and Brett questions. If you guys have them, use that comment section and we'll jump over to them and go from there. So I think with that, I'll kind of guide you guys through. Like I said, we have Chris, who's our founding chairman and expedition leader, and Brett Mcbride, our fishing master. Both of them been here from the very beginning, which started with Offshore Adventures. Chris, what is Offshore Adventures?
Oh, that's something that kind of where it all began back in the late 90s, where, we was back before the internet. It was a fishing show that was on ESPN Outdoors. It was about something that was different. It was about taking the whole family out on long range trips, which Brett had really introduced us into this more exploratory type fishing, where when you go fishing for 12 to 14 days, and then come back. So it allows you to go deep into the wild. And it was about catching and releasing a lot of fish, keeping one of those fish to feed everybody. And then, who's not here with us there, you can see that's my ex-wife, Melissa. And then that is Chef David Traylor. We would keep one fish, and Brett and David were the masters at, if we're going to catch one, let's handle it absolutely as perfectly as we can so that it's the greatest table fare it can be. Because otherwise, what's the point? And so there was a lot of that in there, and it was big game fishing, primarily between Alaska and the Panama Canal.
We're just kind of watching some B-roll here on the side, so you can sort of see what the show was all about. But Brett, I'm curious. I actually don't even know the answer to this question. How did you get connected with Brett or with Chris in the first place?
I got a phone call from a friend of mine. I was living in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. And I lived there for about 21 years overall. But I moved there in 1987. I was there full time by 1989 anyway. And I had just bouncing around from boat to boat, fishing tournaments. And so I just got a phone call from a friend of mine, Bill Seiler, and he had been working for Chris for a while. Chris will tell you, a story about him. Because I wasn't there, but he said that he wanted to take a break and go surfing for a few months. And I was like, really? Okay, yeah, I got it. So I went over there and I jumped on the boat and I met Chris, and we just got along really well. And so he offered me the job, and I told him, I said, well, let me call Billy. I told him I was just going to fill in for him. I'd feel bad about stealing his job. But when I called Billy back, he said, he had no idea, no intention of coming back. So that's how it got started.
That was in Puerto Vallarta.
Yeah.
The boat was in, so we had made a trip from Cabo down, from Southern California, Orange County down to Cabo. We were there for a while, and we were starting to just kind of explore a little bit further south. And I was in a 48 Viking at the time, and it was tied up in Puerto Vallarta, and Bill headed out, and Brett went down and was actually on the boat. And I think I actually sent down some friends to go enjoy the boat. And they met him before I did. He'd been working there for 2, 3, 4 weeks before I came down and met him. And it was clear he had so much he could teach me. And, all of a sudden we were free diving, and we were fishing in remote places, and we were doing inshore and offshore stuff, and being someone who kind of grew up in Kentucky, mostly chasing fish and frogs around, and then going down to Southwest Florida and kind of fishing in the Gulf on family holidays and things. I like catching bluegill in a puddle as much as catching a blue marlin on the Hannibal Bank. So he was someone also who just loved the water and loved all of the things you could do on the water. It wasn't about just like catching the big one or the billfish or anything like that. It was about this just really broad, deep relationship with the water, and it really allowed me to grow and evolve a lot. And I enjoyed that. And he's obviously very good at what he did.
So obviously the ship wasn't necessarily the main focus of the beginning of Offshore Adventures, was it? The MVO?
Oh yeah, the ship doesn't come around and for 10 years after this or 8 years after this. Here we are, like, remember that place, Brett, man? That's down in Panama, Cove Island. Yeah. Catching giant snook. Oh, yeah. That was so much fun. And then, what is it, 12, 14 miles around the corner is the Hannibal Bank. And, it's black marlin and everything else and tuna. And what a special, special time that was. For that period of time, I never fished harder in my whole life than that period of time. And it was a real privilege. But we were learning a lot, right, Brett? Like, as much as we were trying to pour the world's oceans into people's lives, after a while, we started to have kids and families, started to kind of evolve our relationship with the ocean,
So I'm curious, how did the MVO come into the picture?
Well, Brett, why don't you tell that story? Where did the MVO search come into the picture?
Well, that was years later. How many of these episodes we did? Like 150 or so?
We made 188 Offshore Adventures.
We did a few seasons of Ocean Hunter.
Yeah, we made 188 Offshore Adventures.
But during that time,
Go ahead.
Yeah, if you remember how the salon floor used to look like. Remember when Rich and all his gear, and with the camera guys and us on the boat, and especially if we were always targeting, all kinds of different things. So we'd have our weather gear and all this dive gear out and all the fish tackle, and plus all the camera gear and all the people were sleeping on the floor. And it was like we were traveling. We had been from, Alaska to Ecuador to Florida to Kentucky, just all over the place. And so it just got smaller and smaller. And we had discussed, if we could just get a little bigger boat. And we had been, you had tried to get the OP, and that would have been perfect vessel for Offshore Adventures. Just to get a little bigger boat, but continue the same kind of thing. So we had been looking, and then that's where the story actually turns to you, because Chris met the owner of the OCEARCH. It was the Arctic Eagle at the time, but we were in Costa Rica shooting shows. I think we just got done with the season probably, so we had a little time. But I'll let you tell that part of the story.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was really different about Offshore Adventures at that time, what Brett's talking about, all those places that we went to, we did that in one boat. We took one boat everywhere. We didn't fly into a place and get on a local captain's boat and go out. We were exploring, and he was figuring it out, and we were figuring it out for ourselves. And basically, we had maxed out that boat and actually probably gone way beyond what that boat was even made to do. Certainly stretching its capacity. And we came in.
We'd only held 1,700 gallons.
Right.
Talk over you.
Yeah. It only held less than 2,000 gallons of fuel, and we'd have bladders on the side. And it was just, we were doing the best we could. We were having a blast. And one day we were fishing, and we came in from Cocos after diving there. And we pulled into Los Sueños Marina. God bless Bill Royster down there and his whole team. They've been great to us down there. When we pulled in there, there was almost nothing there. It was just getting started. And this boat here was parked in the bay out in front. It was anchored. And it had about a 45-foot Express on it, like a small sport fisher. And
Cabo.
Cabo, 46 Express. And a Jeep and a center console. And Brett and I were just like, wow, anywhere, anytime. And we were just looking at it like, man, we could go anywhere on that thing and explore the last corners of the earth where, there still had been no pressure on the resource, so that we could kind of document what a virgin resource looked like, finish a lot of what Zane Grey didn't finish in the last leg of what he was trying to do. And they had their lights on. And so Brett and I made a cocktail that evening, and we went out at night with a couple of baits, and we were throwing it under the boat, under their lights, and catching big corvina and snook. I walked into the bathroom later that night up at the hookup, the bar that they have at the marina and the restaurant, bumped into Denny Wagner. Remember, he was our first engineer. Remember Denny?
Yep.
And Denny goes, "Hey, Chris, you see that boat out there?" And we were actually both in the bathroom at the urinal. And he looked over his shoulder at me and said, "Hey, Chris, that mothership out there, that Frank Miles, he's looking to get rid of that thing." And I'm like, "Oh man, that's way more than I can afford. There's no possible way I could, even if I wanted it, I could buy it." And he ended up connecting me with Frank. And Frank, this guy is a total stud, right? He's got boats all over the world. He's the guy who came up with the lift and how it works, and using the king crabber, because you can flood your port crab tanks on it and pump out your starboard side, and then you can use a lift that he could pick up a 50-foot sport fisher and put it on the deck with 5 degrees of list. And he saw me and Brad as 2 young people who were doing good things for the ocean. And he basically said, "How much is every penny you can scrape together, and I'll sell it to you for that." And I leveraged everything I had and did it. And he probably sold it to me for a third or fourth or what he had in it. And that really started to give us an opportunity to expand what we could do on the ocean.
So you talk about expanding. Eventually you did expand to sharks, which is obviously what OCEARCH is a little bit about today. How did that transition take place?
Well, the true story is, at that time we were making Offshore Adventures, and we wanted to try to do this more of the science of fishing. And I was trying to pitch that to the Discoveries and the National Geographics and those various networks. And we wanted to finish. Zane Grey wanted to do one more leg where he went, I believe, from the Panama Canal over toward New Zealand. And we wanted to kind of finish with Zane Grey, but I couldn't sell that. I was trying to, and I needed to, what are the cash that requires for that ship just to keep it maintained floating is more than I can handle personally if we don't have an enterprise that we're building around it. And while I was trying to do all that, and we finished the last season or 2 of Offshore Adventures on the ship, but it just didn't really feel like Offshore Adventures. It had gotten much more commercial.
Well, if you remember how, let me jump in for a second. If anybody remembers Offshore Adventures and how it was, we fished from the same boat. It was a 72-foot boat, and we did all our fishing from it. And you could always be fishing. Like if you're traveling, you would have lures in the water, and you'd be glassing for birds and fish. And then when you found them, you go right to them and catch the fish. You'd make an episode or part of one, and you can continue. On this boat, if you have a 45-foot sport fisher on the deck, you would have to go and put the sport fisher in the water, but you can't do that in the open ocean very often, almost ever, because it's too rough, it's too dangerous. So, and the ship isn't something you can really fish off of effectively. So it didn't really fit Offshore Adventures the way it had always been. In that we could have done the science of fishing and restructured the whole thing.
Yeah, but I couldn't sell it. And in the middle of that time, we were finishing the last year and a half or 2 of Offshore Adventures, and I was trying to pivot where we were going. This scientist named Michael Domeyer came up to me and said, "Hey, do you think that you could use that lift to pick up these white sharks that I study?" And I was like, "Oh God, I don't know." I asked Brett about it. Brett was like, "Yeah, I think we can." And then I was like, "Well, why?" And the guy was like, "Sharks are the heroes of the ocean, man. If you lose the sharks, you lose the ocean. And our kids don't have any fish sandwiches to eat." And I didn't even understand how that worked. He explained to me they keep the second tier of the food chain from over foraging and wiping out all the fry out there, the baby tuna, the baby billfish, baby mahi, baby wahoo, baby everything. And then where there's seals, they prevent them from over harvesting because they keep them on the beach, and then they don't wipe out the salmon and the steelhead and the cod and the lobster. and that we were down to 9% of our large sharks because of shark fin soup. And they were so big, we didn't know how to manage them back. We didn't know where they made it or gave birth or the full migratory range or any of that stuff. And so I was just like, are you trying to tell me if we lose our sharks, we lose the ocean? And he said, yeah. And Brett said we could get him in the lift. And I said, well, look, let's just take this guy out to Guadalupe. And it was 2007. And on the first trip we went out there, Sharkmen did not exist. This was 2007, and we went out to see if it was possible, and we proved that it was possible. And then came back, and I continued to try to sell this other thing about Zane Grey. And then we took a skeleton crew out there with us this year in 2007, and we proved it was possible. And then we went back in 2008 and did it again, and we were just helping them. We didn't have like a plan. We weren't trying to make a show. But the second time we went in 2008, I bought a couple more camera guys. Primarily, we were just trying to document it for science purposes and things like that. So it wasn't a normal like film cruise, just a couple guys, young guys kind of volunteering to do it. And then Rich kind of guiding everybody. And I came back after 2008 and I couldn't sell the other thing and I was running out of cash. I had like 3 months of cash left. Ended up hiring this lady named Maureen Lemire because we couldn't get them, to try to put something around this to go pitch to National Geographic. Because she worked on Blue Planet. She was an executive producer of that. And she crafted a story around it and then got us a meeting at National Geographic. It was actually 2009 when we sold Sharkmen to National Geographic based on some of the footage that we had done before. And then that kept us alive. I mean, we were within a month of not being able to pay any bills and losing the ship and the house. And we got a gig with National Geographic. And that allowed us to make the show and use some of the money to pay for the ship and give it to the scientists. And then the other part of the money we used to make the show over at Fisher Productions, our little production company that was making all the shows that we made for ESPN, like Offshore Adventures. So that's kind of how it happened. We didn't have a diabolical plan. I remember, Brett, when I was like, Brett, I think we need to go help this guy catch these white sharks. He said it'll make a difference. I have no idea what'll happen. You're like, oh man, sharks? It wasn't at the top of the list at that time where we were. We were more into billfish and free diving and baiting. But we also were starting to have kids. Ocean had been good to us. We felt like we had an opportunity. If this guy's saying we lose the sharks, we lose the ocean. And we got an opportunity to bring guys like Brett together with scientists around a ship and then explode science so we can manage them back. It seemed like the right thing to do if we put the ocean first in our lives with what we had the capacity to contribute.
Brett, what were those first couple of trips to Guadalupe like for you? Like how did that change you as a fisherman? What do you remember from those days?
I started getting injured a lot more. In the beginning, we like Chris says, we hadn't been dealing with sharks. Sharks to me had always been something that you just every now and then possibly would target a mako shark or something, but I just didn't have any interest in sharks other than keeping my fish away from them for the most part. And I dive with them all the time. And so they're a big part of my life. But, getting out there, the size of the sharks out there, there was so much more difficult than starting. If we would have started off in South Africa or someplace in the shallower water and not such giant sharks on average, it probably would have been easier. But it wasn't hard to get bit. We knew that. It was just a matter of what kind of tackle we were going to use, how hard we had to pull, how we were going to get them onto the lift. That was by far the biggest problem. We knew we could, subdue a shark and pull it up alongside of the boat. But keeping it healthy is a big factor. Those sharks can get wrapped up in the line on their first run, and next thing you're pulling a shark in backwards, and harming it. Or when you try to get them onto the lift, how are you gonna keep them to the surface? How are you gonna stop them from swimming outside the lift? All those things were the thing we had to solve, and we had to solve it right away.
So, Chris, I'm looking at the B-roll here, and I'm starting to see, blood work being taken, tracking devices being put on. This is another pivot that you sort of made too. You weren't necessarily, or were you doing that science necessarily with Offshore Adventures? But here we start seeing science happen. This is kind of the genesis of what we see today. Am I right?
Yeah, well, it really started a little before this because on Offshore Adventures, at the last several years, we had started to take out scientists because we started to learn that the scientists have to publish these papers. And then if you're going to change policy and manage, can't change future of the ocean on a fisherman's story, you need these papers. But the scientists, even with the fish we were catching at Offshore Adventures, they didn't have any capacity. They didn't have any boats or money, and most of them didn't know how to catch what they studied. We saw that during Offshore Adventures, and we started taking, if we were going to the Sea of Cortez and we were going to be catching sailfish while we were making those shows, we started taking the scientists who studied those sailfish. Or if we were going to be catching black marlin on the Hannibal Bank in Panama, we took tags and put them out for the guys who studied black marlin and everything in between. Those were the scientists, and we started to see this making business doing good. It didn't cost us any more money to throw the scientists on the boat. It was a little more crowded, but we could help them learn way faster because they were all complaining that we don't, data deficit and time are the big challenges for the ocean. We don't have the data and we're running out of time. And so those were the scientists who then taught us about this shark problem. So we had been dabbling with it a little bit, but as you see it evolve here, and we're getting more into like 2009, 2010, and this imagery here, we're starting to build out our science capacity, and people are starting to actually see that in the content. When we were making Offshore Adventures, we were doing a lot of it, but you didn't see it in the show. It was just kind of like helping out in the background. And yeah, so here's where the science emerges. We start to learn about how the system of science works in academia, and, you know, continue to evolve here because what we do now is quite a bit different than what we were doing then.
So you're working in Guadalupe, you're starting the whole shark thing, but really, I mean, you guys have been all over the world. How many times has the ship even been through the Panama Canal? This is obviously San Francisco. Ship's been underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, you know.
Man, it's always, I got to tell you, I don't know how Brett feels. He's, you know, he was moving around in boats more than me prior to us coming together. But like every time we bring the ship in or out of like a new place, like when you pull in or out of San Francisco the first time, you just can't believe you're there, that you drove your boat there and you're going to work there, whether it's there or in Brazil or Chile or the Galapagos or Australia, South Africa, coming into Cape Town. You're like, wow. So yeah, well, the big change was the ship had global capacity and the old boat didn't, and the sharks were everywhere and all the scientists needed help.
I remember having this conversation before with you when we were, you know, like when you start, when you're younger, it's like the world seems huge, just your neighborhood, right? And then, so it's like, you know, taking a trip from San Diego down to halfway down Baja, it just seemed like, oh my God, that's such an adventure so far. And you feel so strung out. And then spending seasons at the Cape, you know, and there's not much down there for support, and you're pretty strung out. And then just years and years go by, and then all the stuff we did with Offshore Adventures. I remember coming back through the Panama Canal into the Pacific, and it's like, it felt like you could just almost look in the binoculars and see Mexico, you know, just like, oh, it's just right there because we're back home again, because we've just been stretching it further and further. And it just starts to feel like what you consider home base is just bigger and bigger. You're more comfortable. You've seen it all before.
That's been like the biggest change ever, right? Unbelievable to think that like nowhere feels too far away.
So speaking of far away, one of the farther trips was all the way to South Africa. How long was that trip, and what took you from the Pacific to South Africa? Because that's sort of the next. There were a couple other stops. The Galapagos, I think, were in there too. Help me, any of the other ones I'm missing.
So South Africa was before all that, Galapagos and Chile, Brazil, Australia, all that stuff. No, so we had worked on the West Coast. No, we did this amazing project with Pete Klimley out of Cal State. Oh my goodness, he's up at Berkeley. UC Davis. And he is a beast in the science space. Many people out there, if you're a scientist, you know Pete Klimley. He put together a pretty awesome collaborative team doing this Mcbride project with Cocos Island, the Galapagos Islands, and the Revillagigedos Islands in Mexico. And so we worked our way from Mexico down toward the Panama Canal, taking this big collaborative team with UC Davis and Alex Hearn and a bunch of people, and that got us down to the Panama Canal, helping them on this project. We were tagging tiger sharks and all sorts of other sharks for them. And then the Gulf oil stream spill happened. And I didn't know Bob Huter at the time, but I just felt like we had to do something. And I said, hey, Bob, what happened with the Gulf oil stream? Is there anything we can do to help? And he's like, yeah, we can't get samples off these big sharks. Can you come help us get samples off these big sharks so we can see if the oil and the toxins are in their tissues and all this stuff? So we did that. And we were on the East Coast. And then after 3 years on National Geographic, the show was canceled. And we were in a bit of a bind again. We was like, oh, man, we're going to run out of cash fast if we don't do something here. And the History Channel came in and stepped up and bought a year of shows. And they were really excited about South Africa. So we went down there and met with Ryan Johnson and Enrico Gennari. And they were really instrumental down there, and where we built out and even expanded on this concept of big collaborative science teams around one shark, so we could get all the data for all the scientists who studied anything at one time from one animal, which means you could get the information catching a lot less animals. And but that was not how science worked. Everyone was more in a silo or in an individual, or that's just the system of science. It wasn't the people, it was the system. But I got to give credit to those guys down there, because they built out, I think, really building on what Pete Klimley had done. They really then expanded this idea of a massive science team with all these scientists from different institutions, and they broke down a lot of barriers there. And OCEARCH really, I think, helped bring that science community together, because they were all really competing against each other, and suddenly they realized they all had a lot in common and they liked each other. And then, Allison Koch and Ryan Johnson and Enrico, and there's several others Oliver that I'm missing, several young ladies who were great scientists. We had a great veterinarian down there. Remember the vet, Brett, the old timer? Yeah, he was great. Yeah. And then the guy who came from the government, who was so instrumental in mentoring us through that, I can see his face, but I can't remember his name. He was great. And so that was the first time we had a really big collaborative science team, and we went down there to help them understand how their sharks were moving around, get them samples. We figured out like what bacteria are in the mouths of the shark in South Africa, so they can have the right antibiotics for people down there if there's an incident, and a lot of toxicology work on the sharks. And that to me was, I think, the pivot. I'll be interested in what Brett thinks about that. But after that was brutal. We were down there for a long time. We had to endure a bunch of politics that had nothing to do with us, that really tested us. But we knew we had to finish there no matter what. Otherwise, it might be the end of OCEARCH. And so we went down there and we did. But it changes fast down there, Brett. You can talk about the experience of working down there. It was a real test.
Yeah, it's the weather was always on our mind. It was just we had certain bays that we had to fish in by a calendar schedule. Because you have certain scientists that are meeting you in certain places, so you can't just rearrange your whole schedule and your whole season based on every weather pattern that comes through. You have to grind through a lot of it, and then still get the fishing done and try to keep everything safe. And it was tiring. It was really tiring. It was great. We were getting a lot of sharks, but there was also the television going on. It's been a while since we've had that kind of in-your-face camera stuff that it's there's just so much. I remember at the end of the trip, I was so over it. It's like I couldn't even think about going back to Africa yet, because it was like, especially with all the political controversy that happened there. Having those guys, tell people that we're chumming 50 tons a day. So I just had them on the boat, and I told them we're going to do 25 kilograms a day. Yeah. And they printed that in the newspaper. So just malicious acts like that, was also weighing, so you have the weather, you have the task at hand, you have the camera stuff, plus you have this extra political stuff. And I think it just made that the most tiring trip of all.
Yeah, it was brutal. Like we've learned a lot on this, got beat up, and I think it's an appropriate time to talk about it. We never talk about this sort of stuff, but we were just trying to help. We didn't know about the politics of science and scientists trying to undermine other scientists because of territoriality. And They don't want other young scientists coming up because they're trying to own the space so they can monetize it for themselves, even though they may not have the capacity to learn. And so you got the guy who's like the cage diver who doesn't even want the science done because he just wants to monetize the sharks. You got the photographer, acts like they want to look after the sharks, but they don't want the science getting done because they just want to monetize their pictures. And all these agendas that were going on, and you're just like, man, I thought you guys needed some help catching these sharks so we could publish this paper so we could make sure our kids could eat fish sandwiches because everyone said no sharks, no ocean. What in the world is going on? Like, none of this stuff has anything to do with helping the sharks so that we have a healthy ocean. And we were really maturing. I feel like coming out of South Africa was the first time I no longer felt like young, like really young. Like I was like, if we can endure this, we can work anywhere in the world and endure anything. And, up to that point, I still felt like we were like young explorers getting out there, kind of pushing the envelope. But after that, I felt pretty seasoned. I don't know how you feel, Brett.
Well, it couldn't have gotten much worse as far as how much of an uphill battle you have to fight against all this extra stuff. We already got the challenges that we have, but then it just couldn't get any worse. When you have papers publishing stuff like so false like that, then everybody believing them. And then we had that incident where there was a boogie boarder who was killed fatally, attacked by a white shark in False Bay, and we got accused of being right there and causing it. And we had been 140 miles away for like 4 days, and we had never been in that part of the bay. Never chummed more than 25 kilograms a day, which was what those other guys do twice a day. It was just nonsense, but it wouldn't go away. People believed it. And once it got said, it's hard to undo an accusation when people don't even read all the retractions and stuff anyway. So it's just that caused us to have to sit there and endure that time period where there was nothing to do, wait for our permits.
Yeah, I think that was like the biggest threat. We knew that I felt like when we were there, if we didn't sit there and wait and actually endure and force the government to give us back our permit so we could finish, which is what happened, that this whole false narrative would be spun into something like OCEARCH ran out of South Africa because they killed somebody. You know what I mean? And there's just no way. And we felt like, so I think that when the permit was paused, we were 140 miles away and we'd been there for a number of days, and we'd never been where the incident happened. We'd never been within 40 miles of it. I remember we sat on the anchor right there in False Bay in front of a super cool little town. The name escapes me. I think for almost a month, we refused to leave. And I think they expected us just to pull the anchor and drive away. But we felt like if we did that could be the end of OCEARCH. So we that's this thing where anybody out there is trying to do anything in your life. If you got enough tenacity and stamina and grit and grind, there's nothing you can't do. We just sat there and refused to leave and called them 3 times a day, every day.
So cool seeing people chime in from South Africa right now. Apply come back. So it's really cool to see so many people chiming in from all over the place. Thank you all for participating. So we talked about, you're doing a fishing show, the Fishing Offshore Adventure Show. You transition into sharks, sort of a new TV show. You change networks to History Channel in South Africa.
Yeah, 1 season and canceled.
Yeah, so things like we talked about at the beginning, there are twists and turns to this story all over the place. So South Africa comes to an end, and that's when the transition to the United States really comes in 2012. So South Africa is done.
So we're basically, at this point, we're basically driving the ship home from South Africa thinking that we're losing the whole operation, the house, the ship, and everything, right? And the only reason we went there, we had a little bit of money left from the TV contract. I had promised Greg Scommel that we would help him get a tag out because some sharks were showing up in the Cape and they didn't really know where they were going. They were using PSAT tags, but those things just don't give you much for tracking. So I just said to the guys, let's go up there and see if we can put a couple tags out for Scommel and a few other people. And then, probably going to lose the ship after that. But, maybe we'll help solve the life history puzzle of Jaws, even if we just get a couple of tags out. And then this particular shark came in, and this was quite a game of cat and mouse, huh, Brett?
Yeah.
That's Mary Lee. Why don't you tell them about the capturing of Mary Lee?
I was just sitting there watching the film. Yeah, Mary Lee. That was, well, of all the sharks that we've ever had, Mary Lee is probably the most iconic, and then the one that sticks in your mind the most because of how long we played with her before she, came on, and then how hard she was to get on the lift, and then everything she meant to us since then. But she was, we were fishing, we had to stay outside the 3 mile, and it was, we had a really nice flat day, and she was spotted from the mothership, and we were called in on her. And sure enough, when we showed up there, she was just below the surface most of the time, not really full high and dry finning until we got there. And then she just cruised around back and forth at a quick pace all over the place, looking for something. She smelled, a little bit of chum coming off the back of the boat, and was just like, "What is it? Where is it?" And then she wouldn't take our bait. She just, we try to get the bait in front of her, and she's like, "Gosh, she looks like she's just ready to go, but just still looking for something else." And then she just started getting more interested in the boat, coming up and chewing on the tube, and you were shaking the tube and a piece of tuna head there, getting her even more excited, but she still wouldn't take the bait. And then finally, when she came up and started mouthing right by the engines there, gave me an opportunity to put the hook in her mouth and just pull sideways and just get the job done without her having to actually go for the bait, because I didn't know if she ever was gonna before she left. So, but what an amazing shark.
And that was brutal conditions, lots of current, it was very difficult to get her in there. You can see the current ripping through past the cradle there. And this was, we named the shark Mary Lee. I named it Mary Lee after my mom, which don't do too much. Did that because literally thought it was going to be the last shark we were ever able to work up with a science team. And yeah, she swam off, and the rest is history. She basically saved OCEARCH.
And so, yeah, you get a tag on her, and not so long after that, something that we don't always talk about when we talk about the evolution of OCEARCH, but a big thing was the launching of the tracker.
Yeah, so we just launched the tracker right before this expedition, kind of when we were down in South Africa, the tail end of that, because, I was just trying to give people every possible vehicle to be a part of the science, because the traditional science keeps everyone out, and I was trying to disrupt all that, make it like open and collaborative and inclusive, because we really felt like if we were going to make an impact on the ocean, it was going to take everybody. So everybody should be able to be involved. And so that was when the tracker began. And then Mary Lee proceeded to go down the East Coast. And as you can see, she just lived on the beaches of the southeastern United States there on that portion of her track. And the whole world fell in love with her. What really ignited it all was she swam down underneath the Jacksonville Beach Pier in Florida. And I remember people saying, like, there's no white sharks in Florida. I'm like, well, there's one on 17 feet and about 4,000 pounds underneath the pier right now. And I didn't know what to do, so I called the Jacksonville Beach Police Department. I was like, I felt like I had to call somebody. And I told them about it. They shut down the beach. A couple hours later, she pinged in a few hours off the beach, and then the whole press universe just lit up around it. And John started the Mary Lee Twitter handle, and she began communicating with people. And it was interesting. We were doing about 40 million viewers a year on TV. And in just 3 months, Mary Lee cruising down the coast and engaging with communities drove over 1 billion earned media and digital impressions across social platforms and news outlets. And we were like, oh, wow, maybe I had enough money to hold it together for maybe 60 to 90 days and just trim expenses and try to sell something to see if there was a new path to have relevance and scale, because we'd had great partners for 15 years at this time. Like Costa Sunglasses has been with us from the beginning, Yeti Coolers from the beginning. And these people didn't, they wanted to help if we could provide some sort of value. And suddenly, our social platforms exploded, and we had our own scale. We had more scale than we had on TV. And so I was able to take that to Caterpillar because, there's 5 Caterpillar engines in the ship, and talk to them, and they loved our work and they wanted to help, and they really stepped up, and they gave us 3 years of funding. And that allowed us to stabilize the operation. And that's when we really went from Brazil to Chile to Ecuador over to Australia. We did all that with Caterpillar, and then Costa and Yeti hung in there with us. And when that 3-year kind of time frame of that contract they gave us to stabilize things so we could diversify our funding, we were able to bring in then like the SeaWorlds of the world and start our own Shark Tracker Light Lager and get royalties from that, and Ocean Bourbon. And we were able to, Southern Tide came in with an apparel play for a while and helped us. We were able to diversify, and, really Mary Lee doing that, and then Caterpillar stepping up the way they did, and then all of our other partners then building out with us over time allowed us to transition from, that kind of TV model to more of an open source sponsor model. And that's kind of the evolution that has been going up till now. And now OCEARCH is kind of transitioning into more of a licensing model. So it's been a very interesting journey, and how these ability to pivot to keep funding the ship and keep funding the scientists, the enterprise behind it, has been a real challenge. But we've always found a way. We never gave up, and we always found a way. And sometimes when you think it's over and you have nothing to lose, you would do or try something you wouldn't normally do or try, because you're like, oh, I would never give everything away. Why would we give the tracking away? Why would we give it all away? Don't we need to use that department? That turned out giving it away was the key to creating enough scale. And it's like Google, right? Give the product away, give the content, the science, be totally inclusive. It's going to take us all anyway if we're going to be proud of the planet we leave behind for our kids. Give it to the whole community so the whole community is part of it. And then brands want to talk to your community. So you give the product away and you monetize the scale around it, not the product itself. And we really began to study things like Twitter and Google and Facebook, Instagram, and how they operate, and really try to Googleize the approach to ocean research and democratize the space and make it by the people for the people, instead of the old individual model with grants and the ivory tower kind of deciding who gets funded. It was the democratization of the place. And suddenly all the people who track the sharks and use the educational curriculum, when they're buying the things they need every day, they're actually funding the work. And so now they're lifelong philanthropists, and you've democratized the space. And this was a huge, Mary Lee showed us that there was a path to doing that.
So right now, the big thing, then we're going to fast forward a little bit here, because we did start in the Midwest, or we started in the US. You took a trip to Australia, some trips to South America, Chile, Brazil, right? We're taking this model, really continuing to bring it all over the world, even after Mary Lee was tagged. Real quick, anything to add about Australia, South America before we kind of fast forward here to where we are today?
Brett, are you operational now? Do you want to make a comment about Australia? I loved it, man. It was amazing.
You guys, I can't hear almost anything, so there's something really weird going on with this. I'm not sure.
Okay, well, I'll talk about Australia then. So Australia was.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Australia was.
Yes, I can hear you say yes. You can hear me. What was the question?
We were talking about Australia. You got any memories from Australia? What do you think about Australia?
I have a really bad connection.
Okay, can you just mute him, John, until he gets squared away, and then I'll just.
I don't know what to do here.
Australia was amazing. What was great there, again, we took the model over and built a huge collaborative science team there. A lot of politics there in the white shark space. We see as we move around the world, there's in certain areas, there's kind of old timers who try to own the space and prevent anyone from coming in. So we built a big collaborative team around tiger sharks, and we went up the east coast of Australia, through Queensland, and then up over the north through Darwin, and then down into Ningaloo Reef and Exmouth, and finished up in Perth. And I can tell anybody, if you're wanting to go to Australia for your big reef diving trip, go to Ningaloo Reef. It's one of the most pristine bodies of water I've ever been on anywhere in the world. It is outrageous. Probably what the Great Barrier Reef was like 50 or 100 years ago. The people were amazing. And there were plenty of tiger sharks, and we were able to handle that business. We actually put together a big collaborative team that, after working with us, wanted to do the shark work on white sharks in the South. But there's an individual down there who doesn't want those people coming in and doing work because we have the capacity to move farther faster. And they just try to prevent anyone from coming so that they can maintain control of the money and the resource. And so that permit was denied. And so then we drove the boat 78 days, I believe, from Perth back to Corpus Christi, Texas, did some work in the Gulf, and then we slid back around into the North Atlantic in 2016. And that's where the big project that we're in the middle of now kind of started to pick up speed, because we had the tracks of Catherine and Mary Lee and Jeannie, Lydia, and Betsy. And so those 5 sharks we'd been tracking for those 3 years, we were moving around the world, and all of a sudden we had all this new data to start to try to put the puzzle together and figure out other areas where we could study the sharks to try to do that.
Right. So because I do want to save some time for some questions here. So we're working on the project we call the Northwest Atlantic White Shark Puzzle, really putting together the most important, not only the locations in their life, but we're looking at, how healthy the population is, from a reproductive standpoint, from a diet standpoint. We really have all of these different scientists working together. Am I right?
30 scientists and 20 different institutions with 21 research projects now. The most comprehensively studied white shark population anywhere in the world now. We have 55 white sharks tagged in the North Atlantic. We have over 56 published papers now on our work, with another 40 in process. We're going to win this one. I think we got, I'd say 65% of the puzzle put together already, and we're looking for the remaining 35%. We got good ideas on that. We're just waiting for the data. But we know now that these sharks are gathering in Atlantic Canada and various areas, as well as Massachusetts, in the fall and early winter. They move down off the southeast, all of them, some of them wrapping into the Gulf of Mexico. In the springtime, the big females are running into the New York, New Jersey Bight, dropping off their pups. We went there, we tagged 19 pups. They now know that the nursery is between Montauk and South Carolina the first few years of their lives, so we know how to look after the baby white sharks. Big piece we're still trying to nail down right now is exactly where and when are they mating. It's one of the last remaining big questions.
And another really exciting thing we have going right now is the emergence of Atlantic Canada as, some place that people didn't necessarily think to look for white sharks until 2018 when we went up there?
Yeah, well, what happened was when we tagged Mary Lee, she led us down to Jacksonville, Florida. Then one of the unique things about OCEARCH is we have the capacity to move the ship. So we moved the ship down there to see what was going on in Florida. We caught the shark Lydia. She didn't go back to Massachusetts. She went to Canada. And then a year later, we tagged a shark named Hilton off the Hilton Head in the Carolinas. He didn't go to Massachusetts. He went to Canada. So as we develop this data, we have the ability to chase the data, which is really unusual in the science space, because normally someone studies in this one area and then the sharks leave and someone else studies them in another area. We built people from across the entire area, can move the ship across the area, and it allows us to chase the data and evolve the puzzle much faster. When we ended up following those tracks up to Canada, it appeared that there were many more sharks up there, I think, than in Massachusetts. It's a much bigger area. We saw a lot more sharks, and I'm beginning to think now it is the center. Nova Scotia and the regions around it is the center of the North Atlantic white shark puzzle, actually.
Cool. And to kind of wrap things up here, to make sure we can take some questions, I want to pull up this slide here that really sums up so much of OCEARCH since 2006 until now. This collaborative effort, bringing scientists together, have really led to these numbers that you're seeing. Chris, what are the importance of these numbers that we're looking at?
Well, I mean, the most important number there is 55 published papers, right? This is the data that never existed before. Guys like Captain Brett came together when a crew around him in a ship to deliver safe access to these scientists. And that results in these papers. And those papers are already being used for policy. One of them was used to define the size of the park around the Revilla Hijedos Islands in Mexico, one of the largest marine protected areas in the world, and it was going to be too small. And they leveraged the evening foraging runs of all of our tiger shark tracks to expand out the park beyond where those sharks went, so that people didn't sit right outside a park that's too small and whack them. There's been a number of those things. And 37 expeditions, my goal when we started was 22, because that's what Cousteau did. I was like, if we could hold it together for 22, maybe we could do something. So that number just kind of blows my mind that we've been able to do that, and bringing all the researchers together. And I think look, it's just getting started, man. We're just starting to roll. You have to do so much field work for so long before the scientists have enough data that they can publish, that we had to work for like 7 years before papers started to pop, because it takes, say they need 40 sharks, and it takes you 5 years to get them 40, because you only get, 10 or whatever a year, 8 a year. And now we have all these studies ongoing. We have a tidal wave of peer-reviewed published papers coming, 50 plus, which have popped already. And that's what I'm most proud of, right? That is pedigree. OCEARCH is now its own bona fide research institution, cranking out real science for real management. Anybody who says anything different than that just doesn't want to look at the data.
Brett, can you hear us now?
I can hear every third word or so, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll give you one chance to answer this question. Did you, just looking at the whole journey, what are your thoughts with where we are today? Any big ideas that come to you looking at this whole journey?
Well, I'm thrilled to be where I am today. It would have been hard to see this, as a young man, as a fisherman, especially, the odds of me being, where I'm just rising up to where I am today. I mean, like just being a dyslexic child that, with parents that were all, doctors really wanted me to become a doctor, or, highly educated. I found a way to find my calling, and then meeting Chris, and then having this journey just be, you can't see it coming. Like we didn't, in Offshore Adventures, we didn't, even toward the end of it, we wouldn't have really seen where we are today. I didn't know how much I would really enjoy working with the scientists. I tell the story sometimes about how you kind of go up and down as a fisherman, like what really drives you. And sometimes, it was your individual accomplishments as a fisherman and an angler. And then as you become a captain, you have certain accomplishments, and then you start wanting to just see other people catch their first fish and then live through them. But then that's not enough. And then what is enough? And then now you find this, and this is a never ending journey. We could do this forever and still have plenty to learn. And it's very gratifying work. So I'm thrilled to be where we are today.
Cool. Thank you guys very much for taking us through that journey. I do want to give everybody watching a chance to to ask a question or two. So Chris,
I'm living in South Africa.
Yeah. Do you want to do like we did last time, kind of some rapid fire stuff here? If I feed you some questions and ask your question now, but in the meantime, Chris, Freya, age 10, was had a pretty good observation. The name of the ship actually changed from the Ocean to the OCEARCH. How did that happen, and when did that happen?
Yeah, that's correct. So when we were making the ship, when we bought the ship, my little girl, Sarah, we couldn't name the ship. It took us forever to figure out what to name it. And she was little, and we were walking through the parking lot down in Los Sueños, and we're like, Sarah, what should we name the ship? And she's like, Ocean, it's big and it's blue. And then I asked Brett, I'm like, how do you feel about Ocean? And everybody's like, yeah, it's cool. And so it was called the Ocean. And that's why that bourbon that we have is called Ocean Bourbon. It was named after the ship, not the ocean. But then what happened was when we started to slide into the TV, all of a sudden we had the ship, the Ocean. We had OCEARCH, the nonprofit. We had the names of the shows themselves. And there was all these different brands, and it couldn't. So we just said, man, we just need to name everything OCEARCH. And so that's when we changed the name of the ship from Ocean to OCEARCH. And then it was just all about OCEARCH. When, for all of you all are out there, OCEARCH is just the word ocean and research pushed together. OCEARCH.
Cool. Are great white shark numbers on the rise? I forget who asked.
They are on the East Coast and the West Coast of the United States. I think we're the model for the world when it comes to that. In other places, it's not the same.
Jody asked, given today's World Ocean Day, can you speak about the opening of a marine sanctuary off New England in the U.S.? Is there any research related to possibly doing something like that?
Well, I think marine sanctuaries are really tricky, right? Like if you talk to a guy like Brett and you understand it, you see all these people trying to set goals like we need to save 30% of the ocean in marine protected areas by 2030. And it's like, if you talk to a guy like Brett, he's going to say, hey, 90% of the fish are in 10% of the ocean. So, or 90% of the life is in 10% of the space. So if it's more important to find those special places and look after them than to shoot for some big percentage number. It's also important to have as much sustainable activity as you can in any sort of sanctuary, whether it's catch and release fishing for families or free diving or scuba diving, surfing, all that sort of stuff, because most of them, there's no enforcement fleets. So you need to get people out in them that are doing things sustainable for the resource so it can continue to be abundant, and they become your free enforcement fleet. If none of that is there, it becomes a poaching haven, which we're seeing in many MPAs around the world now. So I don't know about what's going on and who's studying things there. Certainly the white sharks are up against the beach in state waters. And they appear to be just feeding on seals, and their numbers are steadily increasing, even though we're still way, way low from what the ocean needs to be as far as for it to be balanced and abundant. So I don't really know anybody who's studying that particular thing at the moment.
Brett, I think this question could be a good one for you. Can you hear me? Brett? Maybe?
I think.
Okay, I'll try and ask this question to you, and then I'll let Chris.
Go ahead and try.
Okay. Have we ever tried considering a less invasive method for doing the science that we do?
I couldn't get it. Sorry.
I can answer that one.
Okay.
We are using the least invasive method at the moment. I think it's very difficult for people to understand, but we have the blood work now. We have the science behind it. It is more stressful on the shark to try to get it up alongside a boat and do about a third or a quarter of the work we can do than it is to pick it up in the lift, because they continue to try to get away and they fight, and their stress levels go through the roof when they're in the water. When they're in the shark, they're in a state of, in the lift, they're in a state of learned helplessness. We see much better blood levels when they're in the lift than we do when they're in the water. So we are using the least invasive method to get the maximum amount of data from every animal. And we now have the published papers to prove that.
Yeah, it sounds like they're talking about whether or not if there was another method doing it boat side. Yeah, that's just people. There's certain optics that people would automatically think that, but we do everything for the shark first. And it's absolutely everything we do is the right way to do it, in my opinion. Doing it boat side, it is constantly stressing out. It's continuing to fight. You wouldn't get all the same stuff done. It's more dangerous for us, more dangerous for the shark. It's not. It's still continuing to try to get away the entire time, and that doesn't happen when they're on the lift. The gravity thing, like I say, the blood work is the report card. It tells the truth about what's really happening as far as the stress they're going under. We use accelerometers. That's for even during the fight time. It's the battle itself. It shows how much effort the shark's exerting. And so it is always on our mind. We wouldn't be putting them on the lift if we thought it was worse for the sharks.
Yep.
I'm
going to ask if they think we'll see white sharks in British waters. I think one day as they recover, you will.
Yeah, I was getting to that one. Any word from Vimy?
Vimy's a pretty good pinger. I think we got some Z pings from him in the last couple of days. I don't have his track up in front of me.
He was off North Carolina last I remember, not too long ago, within the last 30 days.
But that's right where he should be, starting to make his way northbound here as the next moon phase hits and the water temperatures rise.
A question here, why did you guys stop using cages?
I'll let Brett answer that one.
Brett, did you hear the question?
I couldn't hear it.
Okay, we stopped using cages because the guys hated having all the cages on the deck. They were always in the way. They weren't helping us achieve the science. They helped us make some video content about it, but you have to be in a place where you got clear water and no current. Otherwise, they're pointless. And so they were just always in the way. That's it. And most of the places where we really find and catch white sharks, like South Africa, Nova Scotia, Cape Cod, there's no viz and there's too much current. So it's just not practical.
Interesting question here, and I don't know where they got it from. Read today that great whites forage on the ocean floor more than expected. Is this correct? I haven't heard about that, but any comment on that?
I absolutely think that's correct. I know that there's stories from people we've talked to in savannas where they caught white sharks back in the day and they'd pull them up and they were just full of crabs. Look, white sharks eat whatever they want, whenever they want. If there's a large biomass around, there's an event occurring, a big crab ball or crab migration, they're going to eat it just like they eat on a big menhaden run or a bunch of yellowfin or bluefin or a bunch of seals on the beach. So I totally believe that they're rooting around in the bottom, foraging around. Tiger sharks too.
Okay, we'll start wrapping up the questions here, but here's a good one. How accurate is the often quoted number that 100 million sharks are killed each year?
That's a number that came out years ago where it was basically 70 to 100 million sharks a year. They were trying to understand how many were moving through Hong Kong, and that was a peer-reviewed published paper. And I think, when you look at all the ones that are killed and that are unreported or not going through there, I think that number is very likely and potentially low.
One more question just sneaked in here. What is the most common shark we deal with?
White sharks. Hey, John, are all the published papers up under a tab on the site?
They are, yeah.
Give her a link.
Yeah, I can do that. I'm scrolling through questions here, Chris, and I haven't seen any others. Have you seen any that we missed?
No, I just love seeing these people all over the world. Teresa Brown says, how does our organization contribute to inclusivity? Do we hire people of color and women? Do you have mentorship programs? Yes, and yes, and yes. In fact, most of the science team now, I'd say over half of it is female, probably 2/3 of it. And in the office, we have people that come from all sorts of different backgrounds and heritages. So we don't see anything other than people who are passionate about creating a future. Oh, Shailene Peterson is in Flagler Beach, where I spend a lot of my time down in Northeast Florida. I got to give her a shout out. I love it there. I'm there quite a bit. Let's see here, John. If you see any, let me know. And I'm
scrolling through too, and I some of them we answered already, but
someone wants to talk more about the lift. The lift was primarily there to pick up a boat and put it on the deck. Brett designed and with a buddy of his, the cradle to wrap around it, and then the method to get the sharks into it. It's really way overbuilt, which is great. Like we're picking up a 4,000 or 5,000 pound, 4,000 pound shark, 2,000 pound shark, and we can pick up, 70,000 pounds out of the water, which really helps you if you're in really bad weather. You're not like operating on the margin. That's the whole idea behind the ship. It's really simple. It's super commercial. And it's not real sexy on a flat day when you look at her, but when you're in foul weather, she becomes gorgeous real quick because she's made to handle it.
April asks, are we going back to Nova Scotia?
Yes, we will be in Nova Scotia, assuming we get our permits. We're in the middle of the permitting process right now. Things seem to be flowing smoothly. That's scheduled for September.
And can we ever re-tag a shark like Mary Lee?
We would love to have an opportunity to do that, but she would just have to swim up to Brett or the guys and give us an opportunity to catch her. We have no capacity to try to track her down and find her. She would have to just be a gift. We're working off Massachusetts and, oh my God, Mary Lee just swam up to us, or, Nova Scotia or something, which I think is less likely, but we would absolutely do that with any of our sharks because the scientist would have a tremendous opportunity at that point to understand how much they grow. Remember, these are the only white sharks where we're getting accurate measurements of exactly how long the shark is and the distance between its fins and all these really basic things. So if we caught one a second time and remeasured it, we would be able to say, oh, wow, that over the last 4 years, this particular profile of shark, I'd say a mature male or whatever, in the North Atlantic had grown this much. That would be a huge leap forward in science, but really would have to just be a gift from the ocean.
Well, man, I think we'll make this I'm not seeing any newer ones, but where did it go? Someone asked what she can have her kids do to help get engaged and stay, engaged in everything that we are doing.
Well, definitely track the sharks with them. Let their teachers know at school that we got the educational curriculum that's free and open sourced. It's available in over 200 languages in the English and metric system. And it integrates math and physics and oceanography into the real-time tracking of the sharks. Make sure that you're cutting all your single-use plastics out of your lives. That just has to end. And try to buy sustainable seafood when you can. Buy from companies that are making business and doing good. Every single person out there can vote with their dollar. And in the era of conscious capitalism, if you need to go buy a new sweatshirt, I don't care what kind of sweatshirt you buy it from a company that's taking a percentage of what they're selling and helping something you're passionate about, whether it's education or a medical issue or the ocean. So that turns everyone into a lifelong philanthropist. And then all of a sudden it becomes in companies' best interest to support this work that needs to be done so that we can leave an abundant ocean behind for our children. Sharks are the heroes of the ocean, man. Most people, they got the wrong. They think they're the villain, and they are the hero. Lots of big sharks means a really well-functioning ocean, and lots of sharks will save the ocean. And if we lose the sharks, we lose the ocean. We lose the ocean, we lose the planet. It's real simple. That's why we do our work. As you can tell from this story, Brett and I are not shark guys. But we do want our great-grandkids to be able to eat a fish sandwich.
Yeah.
And if that means we got to nail down the shark science space with some great scientists, that's what we're going to do. Because if not us, then who?
Yeah. I want to thank everybody for joining us on World Ocean Day today. Brett, Chris, you guys especially. Definitely an incredible story. Hope that you all learned something from it. Thank you for leaving such wonderful questions. Chris, anything else to say or add?
Carla, we want to come back to South Africa. No, I never could have imagined. I think if you hear this story, like what Brett said, and I know it's kind of rough communicating with him at the end, but like he said, he could have never imagined how this journey would have evolved for him. And he found himself in a spot where he's taking his skills. This guy is like the most gifted waterman in the world I've ever met. And he is giving 100% of his skills to help scientists take the ball way beyond where they could go at a speed that they couldn't achieve. And he's a true servant of the ocean, a servant of the future. And to bring him together with guys like Dr. Bob Huter, who's building these massive collaborative science teams and be the facilitator of that, I never could have imagined that we would be here either. When we didn't know what to do, what did we do? We'd say, well, what would the ocean do if she could decide for herself? We were always trying to do the right thing as we evolved from show to open sourcing, and everything we ever did, we only did it to try to help the ocean. And I think we weren't TV people. We didn't even want to be on TV. You heard Brett talking about that. But could we leverage TV to pay for the ship so that we could give it to the scientists? Yes. And could it help us build a global platform so that Brett and I haven't had to make a TV show since 2012, which I know is probably one of the things he's happiest about. And now we can just include the world in it in real time and in this whole
I can hear that
thing. and to be it really like prepare to give OCEARCH a way to the future so that it can transcend any individual's lifespan and just keep going is really what we're focusing on now. So that, Brett's got the young and upcoming guys. We've got amazing guys working with him on the ship between Max and DJ and Christian, Dave holding the fort, keeping everything running and rolling. And, we are preparing. I mean, we're still young, right? We're in our early 50s. But I'm trying to get the business so that when I'm dead, it keeps rolling, and we're build out a mosquito fleet of smaller boats. So we have global impact and we can be helping a lot more scientists a lot faster for a lot less money than a ship costs. Brett's bringing along the skills of people with all the talents he has so that they can have more impact. And we're basically trying to give it away to the future and looking forward to spending the next 25 years or 30 years making sure that happens. But we are already working on that, which is
I'm down with that.
Yeah. Yeah. So the days of thinking you're going to lose it all, the 3 times we had to fight that battle and just refuse to give up, I'm glad to have that behind us. And I'm glad to be trying to figure out how to give it away to the future.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. And thank you. Well, with that, I think we'll sign off.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Sorry, I'm having some